All right, welcome to America This Week. I'm Matt Taibbi, and Walter Kern is coming. He'll be here presently. We have a lot to talk about this episode, unfortunately. It's been a disastrous weekend. I'm sure there are a lot of very raw feelings out there. A lot of people extremely upset. And we're going to have to go through all of it. There was a shooting over the weekend. And why don't we just take a look at, before Walter comes on the scene, we can look at the video of the Andrew Petty shooting. But before we talk about it, look, I'm going to be very clear about this. Like I've covered a lot of police shootings, killings, assaults. In fact, I've seen such a variety of them that I have a tendency to overcorrect and say, well, let's wait, you never know, because in about 1 in 20 cases, it isn't what it looks like on video. But this one falls into a category of shooting that unfortunately is not terribly uncommon. And I just don't, I don't see any way to look at it and not see it as absolutely crazy. But anyway, let's take a look. Okay. Unbelievable. At Gangsta Computer God. Snooze. Okay. I guess it's not interesting. But look, there's almost always a long timeline with these things. Well, we'll get into that in a little bit later. But I think there were 10. How many shots were fired? If Mr. Producer, can we get that number? It was 10, right? And one of the things that I remember looking at when I first got into this is how to explain cases where there's like a ridiculous number of bullets fired for one person. I mean, I think for the older people in the audience might remember the Amadou Diallo case, which was 41 rounds pumped into a guy who had a sandwich. And that was really actually not even terribly unusual. There was a car chase. I mentioned it in a piece a couple of weeks ago. There was a car chase in Cleveland. Hey, Walter.
Hey there.
How's it going?
Good. I'm sorry I did the thing of thinking it was 3 o'clock rather than 1 o'clock West Coast.
That's what happens when you travel back and forth between time zones. So, okay, we may argue about this one. I don't know. But I was just explaining some of the background. So one of the things you learn when you look at law enforcement shootings in particular is that there are often these cases where like an extraordinary number of bullets are fired. And this is true not just in police shootings, but also in like overseas with the Army. there was a bank robbery where cops shot over like 600 times. There was a car chase in Cleveland that ended in I think it was in a school parking lot, and they ended up firing 137 times. 2019, there was a robbery in Queens. It wasn't even a life-threatening situation, if I remember correctly, and it was 42 shots were fired. There was just lots and lots and lots of these cases, and the police experts describe these things as what's the term they use? Sympathetic fire or reflexive fire. There's like a situation where cops get in a highly tense situation. The worst case is when it's like a car chase. They're already wound up, and as soon as one person fires, everybody fires. Often in the post-shooting interviews, they incorrectly describe the number of shots they fired. They think they fired 2 or 3 times. They've emptied their clip, and I remember there was a quote that police sometimes in these situations will just keep pulling the trigger until their brain catches up with them. And like those cases, almost, I can't think of any one of those cases that didn't turn out to be like a gross miscarriage of justice. This, 10 shots is less than 137, but this guy, he was armed, but he wasn't waving it around or anything. So I think this one, and then that's separate from the political aspect of this whole thing, where I heard from a number of people last night, and I didn't want to hear from them because I was just trying to watch football. And there's kind of a growing story in the Republican side of people who are like, what the fuck is going on? We don't understand this. Because a lot of these incidents don't involve people who are poorly trained. They're experienced. So like, what's going on? I don't know. What
do they think is going on? What do they conjecture?
I don't know. I think what I was just trying to get to is the sense of that in the Republican caucus, there are beginning to be murmurs that we supported this on the theory that it was going to be executed in a certain way, and we're not seeing that. Oh, here's somebody who thinks I belong in jail. Are you serious? Okay. All right. So I don't know, Walter, what was your first reaction to this whole thing? Because look, there's always a long tail with these stories. There are scenarios, they build up over time. People often don't see that. There was stuff going on here, but at the end of the day, it's it's a decision about whether or not there's a life and death situation.
Right. I'm having a little trouble with my.
Yeah, I'm getting an echo also. Is anyone else getting that? No? Oh, Walter's off. Am I actually Mark Ruffalo? I am not Mark Ruffalo. I don't share a lot of Mark Ruffalo's views on things either, which is really interesting that people would say that. So, all right, Walter, are you there?
My problem. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
My problem is that I can't get my thing to go over my headphones rather than.
You sound fine.
Yeah, I know I sound fine, but I'm hearing you through the computer rather than over headphones, which is a little.
I'm sorry.
But maybe I'll try fixing that. What was my first reaction to the shooting? My first reaction was that that guy had a hell of a gun. He had a very interesting firearm with a great optic, which was meant for, you know, targets that are going to be locked on. And, you know, it's, in other words, that's not a gun that I've seen almost in the hands of a civilian, especially not the sight. So that was the most impressive feature in the first few moments for me. I thought, why would somebody have a gun of that kind? Then I watched all the videos and so on, and it seemed two things had happened: that he'd been disarmed before he was shot. Is that how was your impression? And number two, that he that a shot went off at some point. Is that right?
From his gun?
We don't know, but a shot went off at some point.
Oh, I hadn't heard that. I hadn't seen that one yet.
Oh, well, among the gun aficionados, he had a gun which is known for misfiring, a gun which is known for going off when roughly handled and when it shouldn't. So as I followed the Zapruder film, as it were, trying to see in depth into what happened, it was my impression that maybe his gun had misfired after it had been taken away from him, or in the struggle for it. I'm not sure.
Has there been any reporting on that in that
Well,
direction?
no, I don't know what kind of reporting there's been, but I saw it, you know, referenced over and over. Maybe other people did too. I don't really know where to go for reporting on how these struggles occur in the first, you know, day or two, because it tends to be contradictory, muddled, agenda driven, and not reliable. At the point where it started to seem more reliable, you know, when certain consensuses were growing, it appeared that he was not at the point when he was shot in a threatening mode.
No, definitely not. Yeah.
That's what I concluded. Beyond that, I can only say what happens in the minds of somewhat besieged police when dealing with, you know, an at least recently armed gunman. I don't know. I didn't judge it one way or another then, and I have yet to judge it fully. The effects of it are obvious to all. And yet I also revert to something I've said a lot more often on this show than I think should have been necessary, which is that living in a country that is basically a traumocracy, in which the outcome of various incidents becomes a policy driver for larger political movements and policies, is a tragic situation. We are going to be driven by the laws of drama and the laws of, how can I put this, emotional reaction to violence, rather than the goals of an elected democratic set of governments. And this is another case of that. How this incident is finally resolved in terms of the guilt or innocence or levels of neglect, ill training, and or bloodthirstiness of the people involved will be one matter. What will it be in terms of the general comportment of this uprising in Minneapolis, of others that might take place around the country, of the policy of deportation of aliens, of the survival of ICE. Those I don't know. If it can be shown that it has some kind of a structural connection to the kind of instruction training that they're being given, to their overall attitude toward the populace, toward any kind of order that has gone out, that will be one thing. And that will be shocking if it turns out to be true. At the moment, however, given the level of chaos that's gone on in Minneapolis, given the level of provocation, given the level of hostility, and the attitudes of the leaders of the state, I'm loath to hand them a weapon which I don't really believe has much to do with the matters at hand. I mean, as much as I'm a red-blooded sports fan, it's getting to me to be like sports. Do I think ICE is out hunting people on the streets of Minneapolis? No. I haven't seen any evidence of that. Do I think that they're not trained for the level of pushback they're getting? Perhaps. I don't know what that means. And, there I leave it. But I see this all in the context of a very organized, very well-funded, very, in some ways, paramilitary action, which we call a protest, but no longer to me resembles merely a protest. But whether it's what they call an insurrection, whether it's a rebellion, whether it's a kind of color revolution, as the most florid people would make it, I don't know. But allowing for the fact that this was not probably a very defensible shooting. I remain in that mindset. As for the shooting itself, it'll have to be deeply investigated. It's a tragedy. It probably at this point looks like it's going to be quite embarrassing to the people and the forces involved.
Yeah, and it seems almost like the Trump administration is throwing the concept of optics out the window. There are ways to handle situations like this. The one thing that they did do that wasn't crazy was to send Tom Homan up, which is at least a recognition of the seriousness of the hole that they've dug themselves. Although have they? That's like another really weird aspect to this story is what's going on polling wise in America, but I don't think we can get to that today. But let's look at SOT2. This is another aspect separate and apart from the shooting that has everybody spun up to an enormous degree, is the reaction and the immediate instinct to lay blame on the guy. So
an individual approached U.S. Border Patrol agents with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. The agents attempted to disarm the individual, but he violently resisted. Fearing for his life and the lives and safety of fellow officers, a Border Patrol agent fired defensive shots. This looks like a situation where an individual wanted to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement.
This looks like a situation where an individual arrived at the scene to inflict maximum damage on individuals and to kill law enforcement. This individual showed up to a law enforcement operation with a weapon and dozens of rounds of ammunition. He wasn't there to peacefully protest. He was there to perpetuate violence. And he was
As Christy said, you cannot bring a firearm loaded with multiple magazines to any sort of protest that you want. It's that simple. You don't have that right to break the law and incite violence.
I mean, as you know, he was an ICU nurse, worked for the Veterans Administration, and there's no evidence that he brandished the gun whatsoever. In fact, it
but
appears that
he brought
was
a
disarmed
gun.
before
he brought a gun. Have you ever gone to a protest,
I
Jonathan?
mean, we do have a Second Amendment in this country that,
Jonathan, have you ever gone to a protest?
I mean,
Have you gone to a protest?
I mean, no, actually, as a reporter covering it.
Okay,
that's-
I've been to a protest.
Yeah.
Guess what? I didn't bring a gun. I brought a billboard.
Yeah. So, the whole thing about maximum damage and the intention to commit violence and then not to do that on top of killing the guy. They don't have any evidence for that I can see that they've shown anybody. And it's not against the law to bring a legal concealed weapon to a protest. It may not be smart. That's an entirely different thing. And that's the issue that you and I talked about with Renee Good, is what's the difference between Renee Good and somebody like Freddie Gray, right? Is that, Freddie Gray would have crossed the street to avoid police, and these people are looking for police. They're trying to get in the way of arrests and everything, but that doesn't, you do have a Second Amendment right to carry a gun. As one Republican strategist last night said to me, he said, it's a feat when you can get the NRA taking on the GOP and make Tim Walz look good in the same weekend. So that's how catastrophic this thing was for this whole operation. Now,
How is it proved? How is it proved catastrophic? Did they suspend the operation?
No, they haven't. And I was just about to say that the history of this thing is that, wait 10 seconds and there will be another violent swing in these stories. But overall, the ICE operation has, I keep hearing from people that this operation for the Republicans politically is a loser, and that in a different way than 2 years ago, when everything that happened became reflexively the Democrats' fault. And
What are you talking about?
well, so
2
there
years
were
ago.
so at the end of the Biden administration, Donald Trump's campaign benefited massively from every stupid slip up that was committed by the administration.
You're talking about George Floyd?
No. I'm talking
Oh.
about everything from censorship to the weird the weird non-investigation or botched investigation of the Trump assassination attempt, to the firing of missiles into Russia after the election, to right now. There were a gazillion things that the Democrats were being criticized for. Many of them for authoritarian practices, canceling elections, supporting the cancellation of elections, right, around the world. But now this whole thing has turned the tables, and now the Trump administration is just. I just think it's just an abject political loser for them. But
Based on what?
Based on talking to people, people who are even otherwise sympathetic to the administration are like, what the hell is going on? Like, what, I didn't sign up for this. And it's similar to the speech thing. Like, there are a lot of people who had high hopes for the Trump administration. Not so much that there was never anything to say that Donald Trump was going to be like a stalwart defender of the First Amendment or like transform into Ira Glasser. The hope and expectation was that he was just going to not be as bad as the other side, which he still might be. I think people forget how awful the others.
So what if Trump condemned the shooting?
Well, he did, right, in the Wall Street Journal, didn't he?
Yeah.
What did he say exactly? He's reviewing everything, right?
Yeah, I don't have the exact words in front of me. I mean, in other words, Kristi Noem didn't make a lot of fans there, but is Trump acting irresponsible or gloating or bloodthirsty about this, or is he dealing with it in a sober fashion? That's the question.
I don't know how you can say he's dealing with it in a sober fashion when he immediately condemned Renee Good right after that. I mean, again, we've discussed this. I don't think she did exactly the right thing, but
right.
He condemned her right after the shooting. He's been pretty outspoken in describing this whole thing as the fault of other people. And
but what's the whole thing, Matt? That there's a war in Minneapolis?
Yeah,
I mean, in other words, what's the whole thing? That ICE is on a rampage? What is Trump supposed to do except deal with individual acts of, I guess, death and destruction? In the first case, my feeling from watching the whole thing was a woman was driving a car at somebody and resisting orders, and and when looked at closely, was driving directly at someone such that they shot through the windshield, meaning that the physics of it aligned with the story of someone under at least threat of death, whether he should have been there or not, whether he should have been positioned. In the second case, we've got a kind of melee, which has taken longer to sort out, both of which are happening in the remember, Renee Good was not protesting Renee Good. That had already started. We were already in the midst of a street confrontation, a street battle, one in which people were parking cars, making noise, throwing down blockades, using verbal and abuse, attacking hotels and things like that. This is called a battle. This is called a war. The idea that to America it's going to look like a one-sided beatdown doesn't register with me. The Minneapolis quote protesters have decided to bring tactics of extreme confrontation and extremely organized hostility to everyday encounters and on the street, and they have decided to, almost by definition, either observe / interfere with, follow, shadow the actions of law enforcement. It's getting pretty hairy out there, and it's gotten deadly, in fact.
No,
But-
I get all that. I get all that. I get the underlying story
Right.
about the non-cooperation of the state of Minnesota with federal law enforcement. I get the weird hypocrisy angle to the whole thing. Like if you look at the history, the voting history of a lot of the legislators, the Democratic legislators who've been very outspoken on this issue, you'll find that they voted to increase funding for ICE repeatedly over the years. The kinds of things that are now, routinely not being extended to ICE in terms of cooperation. I mean, they're not even allowing them to park on public parking lots in Minnesota. We didn't see that.
They're threatening individuals who aren't even members of ICE.
Yeah, no, I get all that, Walter. And I understand that there is a larger context of this whole thing that includes the issue of sanctuary cities. And as we've discussed, I still don't understand the rationale for that. I think that's a really weird story that people don't fully understand. But because of that, because there is a lot at stake here, because this is a very serious situation where you have the federal government confronting politicians like Tim Walz and to a lesser extent, I guess, Jacob Frey, but all these folks who are sort of actively flouting federal authority. I think that puts the onus on the administration to be mindful and to be careful of about what they're doing. And yeah,
Why?
Because that's just the nature of politics. You don't want people going, oh my God, like that looks like you can't have the. I mean, there are still shots of the Alex Pretty thing that look like the infamous Vietnam photo of the guy being executed at close range. And
So you're saying that the more organized the opposition, the more determined the authorities are to frustrate your efforts, the more how can I put it, widespread and intense and perhaps led from the top this is, the more you have to watch your step.
I think you have to be smart about it politically if you're going to do this. First of all, I'm not 100% sure about the wisdom of this operation as the way to take on, what Trump is always describing as the radical leftist opposition. There are much easier targets with DEI, the USAID budget, censorship, a million other things. But they chose to do something that's very public, that offers basically limitless opportunities for media images with masked representatives of the state, masked, heavily armed representatives of the state constantly interacting with members of the public, which, I'm not so. Before you even start that operation, I wonder how that's going to go.
It's an operation that's going on in other states.
Yeah, but yes, it is going on in other states. There is less friction in other states because of the legal situation in those states, right? I mean, that's part of what makes this what would make this complicated in a different world. But because of a shooting like this happening so soon after the Renee Good shooting, and because of some other episodes, frankly, right? Like the one we talked about where they where they're kicking doors in, or where they're stopping people in supermarkets and stuff like that, and essentially just asking for proof of citizenship. Like, that's stuff you can't do unless we've changed the laws since 2024. You can't do that stuff. So there, on top of all that, it's
so without the cooperation of the state of the state gendarmerie, with in fact the active hostility of the state, with its refusal to cooperate in the execution of federal immigration laws, you should chill out.
I'm not saying chill out. I'm saying be smart about it. And they're not being smart about it. After a something that happened like on Saturday,
Mm-hmm.
the thing you can't do is turn around and blame the guy for getting shot. This was a situation where he's got a whole football team on top of him, and they're pumping bullets into him. In what, there's only one scenario I can see where this could theoretically be called a justified shooting, and that's the one that you outlined, where the gun itself went off. But I haven't seen any reporting to that effect. And even if that were the case, it wasn't his fault. He didn't pull the gun out and wave it at anybody. And then you go on TV and you libel the guy, which is only going to arouse the public against you even more, and make like, if I were really interested in saying, look, we've had a situation for decades now where there's just open defiance of the federal government, and it's got to end, and we have no choice. Which is, by the way, what Tom Homan has said, right? Like, he's been more eloquent on this than Trump has. We have no choice but to go in. We have no choice but to do it this way. We've been left with no choice. But when something bad happens, you got to express remorse. You can't turn around and throw shade at the victim. It just looks like you're devoid of humanity when you do that. No?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure. The question of whether or not the guy was completely not a threat, I think, was settled maybe in the last day or so. Like I said, I went through a chronology of my impressions of the thing. My first impression was that he had a firearm which is used not, for target shooting, not for self-defense, but for the acquisition of targets at range for a handgun, and the backup kind of ammunition that you would use for firefight. That's what I saw first.
Even if that's true, they didn't have a crystal ball. They didn't. They couldn't possibly have have some kind of preordination that there were that some kind of attack.
If somebody comes at you with a .22 and somebody comes at you with a rifle, you have different responses.
But they barely knew that the guy was armed.
What do you mean? I thought somebody called out gun.
After he was already knocked on the ground.
Right.
I mean,
well, I guess what I'm saying is that in the series of decision points that law enforcement uses to decide whether or not they're under threat, there was at least one point at which they recognized that they were dealing with someone who had a very advanced firearm. I imagine that caused a heart rate jump. It would me. I shoot, and I rarely see a shoot. I rarely see a gun of rigged up in that way. It was uh, quite an impressive arrangement. And so, at what point he was disarmed, and if there was another shot, maybe that's complete apocrypha that I, just drifted past. I still have three different quadrants. One is there was this shooting. They want to get to the bottom of it. They want to figure out why these guys reacted as strongly as they did. I'm sure they'll have their stories, and I'm sure, they won't wash with some, but maybe some who've been in those situations will understand them. They may speak to terrible training. They may speak to panic. I'm not sure at this point. But everybody finds a point at which they're satisfied that the moral has been told, and that we can then move on and act as though our emotional reactions thus forward are fully justified because we possess what we feel at least is a sufficient understanding of the Zapruder film. I see that point as coming in the future. Number two, the sensitivity of the statements by public officials. I would rate them low. I would rate them poor. I would rate them as ones which you might want to take back if you have a chance, some of which I think will be taken back and are probably the cause for the sources that you're hearing of who are going like, oh man, not this shit again. We deserve better from ourselves, and now we're subverting our own cause. I'm sure that's going on. But number three is, how does this fit into the Vietnam War? How do you fit the Tet Offensive into the Vietnam War? How do you fit the bomb that goes off in downtown Saigon into the Vietnam War? The war is a fact, and the truth is, I don't see a protest like I'm used to seeing in America in this case. When I read that there might be Minnesota officials on signal chats helping coordinate advanced movements, when there might be an awareness of license plate readers, when I hear that there's a kind of, inner core of activists who have decided that they represent the officials of the revolution and are not going to start stopping people and asking for papers. These are equally troubling matters to me. And the fact is that we're just finding out about a lot of them, but the people on the ground already knew that. The people already on the ground were quite aware that they are in the midst of an organized conflict. They know they're being followed. They know that their very sleeping quarters are being staked out. They know that their families' names and their home addresses have been published. They perceive themselves as being not up against, a wall of civil rights marchers, but as enmeshed in a electronic, sophisticated, and perhaps authorized moment of, I don't want to call it civil war, but civil skirmishing, certainly, in which they feel like the absolute target. They know they're the target. They're the named target. And how that is going to play out for me is the big story. And each of these stories about confrontations, a guy got his finger bit off supposedly yesterday. I'm sure on his side, that's a big, that's circulating as an atrocity. I want to understand where this thing is going, what it really is, and what we're really facing, because to me it has been deceptively portrayed as a organic civil rights struggle. And it doesn't look like that to me. It doesn't look like that to me at all. And the preponderance of the evidence as it comes out day after day suggests great organization, great funding, great awareness of where people are going, where they are moving, where to stop them, where to block them, and so on. That's new in America, as far as I can tell. That resembles some kind of a revolution.
Well,
And to judge a revolution by the rules of tennis is a little bit like I think what I
well, no,
think
no,
is
that's
going
not
on.
what that's not what I'm doing though. So okay,
No, I'm not saying that's what you're doing. I'm saying
Mhm.
that I'm not saying that's what you're doing. I'm saying that I think early on we were judging a revolution by the rules of rugby, and for the people who are on the other side, for the ICE people, for the feds, they were quite aware of what they were up against, whereas the public was watching what appeared to be something from the 1960s, which it wasn't.
Okay, I got to answer this. So a couple of people now have said, first of all, this is part of this is my fault because I supported policies that led to this immigration problem. That's totally inaccurate. I've never been in favor of like open borders or anything like that. I've always thought we need to have strong borders. I was a foreigner myself overseas. I've always it has always frustrated me when people come to the United States and don't show respect for their host country the way I felt an obligation to when I lived overseas. And so that's totally not true. And in this whole thing about how I'm anti-ICE and I shed tears for the perp without all the facts. No, I'm looking at these incidents one by one, and for instance, with the Renee Good thing, we went out of our way on this show to talk about how there is a big difference between somebody who goes looking for an encounter with the police and somebody who goes looking to evade encounters with law enforcement. So this is not an emotional thing for me. This is about this has to do with a lot of the things you're talking about, Walter, about the larger situation, about the notion that there's something like a rebellion going on with Democratic Party politicians sort of egging people to either break the law or disobey orders. I mean, we've been talking about this for months. I don't disagree with that. I'm certainly troubled by things like, I think the sanctuary city rule is crazy, and also completely unevenly applied. Like, there's no question about that. I last covered immigration in depth in the Obama years, when the exact opposite situation to the present was in play, when there was tremendous cooperation between the states and the federal government, and that's why they were able to deport a record number of people. What's happening now is because it's Donald Trump. There are policies of sort of open, refusal of federal authority, and I think that's a difficult thing for a president to deal with and survive. You have to put it down somehow, irrespective of who the president is. You can't allow that. I'm just saying that if you're going to do that, you have to be politically smart about it.
But Donald Trump doesn't have a puppet string that extends to the individual ICE agent. A federal police force of the size of ICE has to depend on its training, its experience, its its culture, uh, its equipment, and so on, and that he will be able to manage mm, the execution of his policy in all of its details is impossible. That he should be held responsible for it is requisite. Okay, I mean, he's responsible for it in the sense that he's responsible for its outcomes. That he's able to work it like a marionette is impossible. That's one of the great tragedies of large scale conflict. You have to sort of let loose people to do their jobs, and how they do their jobs becomes your problem if they don't do them well. And he's dealing with that because apparently in this case they didn't. My my point overall is that if you understand if some kids are fighting in the neighborhood and some things happen, and I don't know, a kid gets knocked out by a log, you go, God, that's too much. But if you find out that it's not some kids fighting in the neighborhood, but you have got a multimodal conflict organized with hierarchies and command structures using electronic communication to anticipate, frustrate, aggravate, and confound the other side, operating in the street day after day in a weaponized, armed situation with the highest possible pitch of emotional and political rhetoric, and certain things happen, then that's another thing. Things happen on the open ocean that don't happen in the bay. And in the open ocean, you have a very much more tumultuous atmosphere. And in a tumultuous atmosphere in which people are being told to throw their bodies, put their bodies in, at the stake in these confrontations with ICE, what the ICE person would understand is there are a certain amount of people out here who apparently have at least been asked to or urged to hurt me. I don't know which ones of these they are. Is it the guy with the really freaky gun with the super optic on it and long mags, or is it that guy over there? Now, that warlike things happen in war-like settings, to me, is not good, not wonderful, and not necessarily helpful to a political side that is behind it. But I think it will be understood as such, rather than understood as Kent State. Some kids with flowers are walking toward National Guardsmen who go mow them down. The weird thing about Kent State is Nixon survived it. And that speaks to my point about the political meaning of all this. I think it's a little premature to decide, as much as a Trump administration peoples might be embarrassed and even mortified by the behavior of their spokespeople and perhaps their own, quote, troops. How this will play politically is a complete unknown. The early 70s were a similar time, except worse, bombings all over the place, all kinds of acts of violence far beyond what we've seen yet, though similar in the sense that there were assassinations mixed in and so on. And how the great American polity reacts to times of civil disorder is a little different, and we're in one. We're in one. I mean, we're in a time of assassinations. I was at a funeral yesterday. For Scott Adams, an influencer, a podcaster. You should have seen the security.
Do you want to say a few words about Scott, by the way, before?
Yeah, Scott Adams was a cartoonist. He did Dilbert back when he became very popular as a cartoonist. Around 2016, he developed a kind of tolerance or an interest in Trump that was not full approbation, but wasn't quite the absolute mandatory abhorrence that was required at the time. If people were going to have big careers in the media, his career as a cartoonist went away. The newspaper stopped running his cartoons, and he kind of reinvented himself as a sage, a daily sort of wake up and hear my wisdom voice of commentary, who was a little different than the other people on the scene. His greatest emphasis was the fulfillment of the individual person. He'd written books like, Loser Think, or How to Reframe Your Brain, or How to Fail 1,000 Times and Still Succeed. And so it was a mixture of this self-help message, this sort of self-fulfillment message, with a political bent. He tended to be, I'd say, on the libertarian side, and he finally became more and more Trump friendly. He then got cancer and had a very public death. He was broadcasting right up until the moment he died, literally, after he'd lost the use of his legs. Very inspiring figure to people who revere American common sense, the sort of tradition of Will Rogers, sunny optimism, Dale Carnegie. We can think positively no matter what our particular circumstances. I think a lot of young people found him inspiring who, have had troubles getting going. I think a lot of people who are in mental or emotional ruts found him inspiring, because he had wonderful tricks and wonderful ways of kind of rethinking about your situation in a way that gave you power over it that you might not have felt you had. But mostly it was a reassuring voice. One of those Will Rogers, or like I say, Dale Carnegie or Mark Twain figures, who just through their steadiness and through their kind of winking, mischievous humor make people feel better. And I didn't really know him that well, but I intersected with him a lot. And, I spoke at his funeral. Now, it was natural, I think, that, a figure of this kind, and this is out in a small town in California where he was living, would be controversial in an age when everything is controversial. But as I say, the amount of security around it really freaked me out. I mean, post Charlie Kirk, post, Trump assassination attempts and so on, we're dealing with a situation in which people are really poised for something bad to happen at all times, and that they were poised for something bad to happen outside a small mortuary in far suburban Northern California kind of gripped my heart. I hope that I hope that the very peaceful and reasonable and sort of good-hearted mode in which he worked is one that carries on. We can use it dearly. I fail on that. I fail on that count myself all too often.
Well, I don't think so.
But at the same time, it really gave me a sense, Matt, that we're talking about events and incidents that at any time in America would be troubling and upsetting and galvanizing, but we're talking about them in a new setting that, in a weird way, changes people's emotional and intellectual comprehension of them. I think there are a lot of hard-hearted people out there right now who didn't used to be hard-hearted,
that is absolutely for sure. It it's 100% become a feature of the partisan argument. People, there's no longer any room for nuance in this discussion whatsoever. People have fully lost patience with one another, and I understand that. I do. You know,
I don't approve of it, by the way. You know, and the truth is, the friend enemy distinction, once it settles in, you just better build your barricades high, because they're all you've got. And trying and from my point of view, with a situation like this shooting that we're talking about specifically, I think I have two goals. One is I want to retain my humanity. I want to not forget that the death of a human being, no matter how complicated the situation, especially by the agents of the state, whoever they may be and whatever they may be, their emotional complexion and whatever may be their mission, is a tragedy in America, which is supposed to be a free, and peaceful, and tolerant society. At the same time, I want not to misrepresent the fact that it's a lot closer to 1969 than it is to 1994, and 1969 feelings and 1969 interests are afoot. When I see that people are organizing very complicated signal groups in order to track law enforcement, follow it, harass it, frustrate it, and so on, and that those may include political organizers who also involved in electoral politics, there's some sense that may be true. I start to go, is this what some people 2 years ago warned me was coming? You know, I've been subject to endless warnings about civil disorder in the United States, and some trigger point that was never specified that would come, and after that we'd be in trouble. I don't know if it's come, and I don't know if this has been it. You know, I know plenty of guys who live in the hills, Matt, you know, veterans, particularly military officers, who examine what goes on in other countries and have watched a trend in this country which they have not thought was good for a while now, as they quietly prepare not to make it happen, but to survive it. And so I want to show an awareness of what time it is. At the same time, I want to show an awareness of what our sort of timeless values are.
Yeah. Well, look, I think you said something really key in there, that you talking about wanting to preserve your humanity. And that's kind of my concern with this whole thing, is that I'm not seeing, I don't see a lot of concern about projecting a desire to retain humanity in this conflict anymore. But let's look at some video. Let's do two things in quick succession. Let's look at SOT 4. This is Caroline Levitt, and this is just so people get the baseline concept that the pretty assault is being blamed on essentially the resistance.
Saturday's shooting remains under active investigation by Homeland Security Investigations and the FBI. The Customs and Border Protection is also conducting their own internal review. As President Trump said yesterday, the administration is reviewing everything with respect to the shooting, and we will let that investigation play out. But let's be clear about the circumstances which led to that moment on Saturday. This tragedy occurred as a result of a deliberate and hostile resistance by Democrat leaders in Minnesota. For weeks, Governor Walz and the Mayor Jacob Frey and other elected Democrats were spreading lies about federal law enforcement officers who are risking their lives daily to remove the worst criminal illegal aliens from our streets: murderers, rapists, pedophiles, human traffickers, and gang members. Governor Walz and Mayor Frey have shamefully blocked local and state police from cooperating with ICE, actively inhibiting efforts to arrest violent criminals. They have also used their platforms to encourage left-wing agitators to stalk, record, confront, and obstruct federal officers who are just trying to lawfully perform their duties, which has created dangerous situations threatening both these officers and the general public and Minnesotans alike. This is precisely what unfolded in Minneapolis on Saturday morning. Obstructing federal law enforcement and inciting violence against officers is wrong and illegal. This used to be a universally accepted position in the United States.
Okay, we'll come back to that. I really don't like the idea of inciting there, but whatever. Let's look at SOT 5. No, this is what you're talking about. This is the backdrop that we're not getting from a lot of reporting.
Oh my gosh. Are you okay?
I'm fine.
Are you okay?
I'm fine.
He's all right. He's all right.
Where's the local PD? That's my question for the press.
Okay. Officer,
Where is the local PD?
what's your message to the local PD, sir?
No.
Okay. Well, the mayor. Very chaotic.
Sir, while you're giving messages, what would your message to the protesters that want you out be? As long as you're giving
No
comments,
comment.
do you have any comments?
Please
to the
get
people that want
back
you
up.
out?
Back up. Please give me some room.
Okay, so
what do we got there? We've got
we got a guy who's bleeding in front of a busted up hotel residence. You know, is he dressed like something out of Starship Troopers? Yes, but
Matt, your local cops, I'm afraid, have those outfits hanging in their.
oh, I know
lockers.
everybody's got all that stuff. Thanks to that, God, I always forget what that law is called. The rerouting of the Pentagon surplus, but whatever. So there is no shortage of video showing ICE agents expressing frustration. You know, in some cases they're injured or they've been, you know, harassed in some way that is provocative, right? Like it is trying to get a rise out of them. Right there, what's notable about that clip is he's asking, where's the MPD, where's the local police? Because in theory, the way these operations would work is if you're going to look for somebody who, say, is a suspected you know, child sex offender, which was the backdrop of that whole Hmong incident. A, you might have had better intelligence from the local cops. B, the cops, you know, would help with crowd control. They would prevent this kind of thing from happening, where, you know, hotels are ransacked and that sort of thing. They've elected to let that stuff fly. And I can totally understand how somebody who's just an ICE agent, right? Like they're not an elected official, they're not politicians, and they're being put in the position of essentially being political actors, how they might, you know, respond in a way that is aggressive. Police have had that problem for a while now.
The police just up and quit, dude. The police are the police
just
police
mostly
said, fuck
quit.
this shit. They're off. They're out of this game.
Right.
You know, I mean, this guy is trying to maintain. What's he trying to protect property there? Like it's not his freaking job to make hotels that have just been completely ransacked secure.
Isn't that where they were staying?
Well, if there are guys back in there, if they're, you know,
if his Confederates and his colleagues are back in there and he's trying to prevent another raid, I'm not sure. Or is he just standing guard over a ruin and as you know, waiting for the police? I'm not sure. But whatever he's doing ain't his job.
Right. But the sort of larger point of
He's also
retaining-
surrounded. He's also surrounded. And I hate to say it, but if there was someone in his perimeter who wished him ill, he doesn't have eyes on that person. That's why he's asking people to step back.
Right. Yeah. No, he is.
He
is
doesn't
asking
know
them to
where the
step
next
back.
he doesn't know where the next shot might come from, or if one might come.
Yeah. And it generally is a good idea to stand back from police. And I think there is some evidence that some politicians look. Everybody benefits. There are a lot of politicians that benefit from the situation going south. Right.
All politicians benefit from it coming south, because, for example, even the Trump administration, to some extent, I think is not as unhappy with these scenes of chaos as you might imagine they are. In some way, every one of them makes their own case, and they have a cumulative effect. It's hard to see in the horse race of short, sharp traumas versus grinding civil disorder, where the public is going to decide it wants to place its highest values, and no one's offering a way out right now between those two alternatives. The other thing that I hear in this is there's an absolute failure of language to make any sort of distinctions between anything. You've got ICE, okay, ICE. That's a monolithic organization run by Trump, directly, so to speak. Then you have protesters, of which some are people who have come out from their house to, because they're seeing enforcement action going on in their neighborhood. Some of whom have driven up with, signs, instructions, comms, equipment. You have some who are building barricades in the streets and some who are, marching the sign. And among immigrants, you've got some who ICE keeps insisting are really bad criminals, but who are seen as a monolith by the protesters and spoken of as immigrants in general.
But that's part of what I mean by, okay, go ahead.
Failing to make any of those distinctions makes it a pretty simple, athletic event or whatever, but not a really, isn't very revealing about what's really happening. I mean, is there any case in which an offender would be considered so heinous and of such, and the need to catch them so urgent that that reasonable people should agree, maybe go get that guy? Apparently not.
Yeah, and like the backdrop for what happened over this Saturday, they were apparently looking. There was a situation that went on in a donut shop before all that happened, where they were apparently looking at something called the Glam Doll Donuts. And they were looking for somebody who was wanted for trying to find the offense. Hang on a second. I believe it was assault. But this is part of what I mean by being smart about the politics. You've got a situation now where there's enough video of ICE agents sort of manhandling or pushing or knocking to the ground or accosting people who are kind of just minding their business in like a stop and frisk kind of a way, that it's diverted attention from the real targets of what this operation is supposed to be. You're absolutely right that that in a sane world, nobody should be excited about any kind of government situation that allows a person who's not only here illegally but has committed a serious crime, particularly like the child sex offense types of crimes, which that's part of what they're doing, right? They're like there are actually such people, but if the headlines and you're creating tons and tons of video about other kinds of interactions and compounding it with a lack of remorse or apology, right? Then you're never going to get people thinking about, well, who's actually the really unsympathetic figure in this picture. And so this whole thing, somebody gets killed, gets hit with 10 bullets. Like, do I think it's a good idea to go out with a gun in the middle of an ICE operation? No, I wouldn't be doing that. I think that's, even if my political views.
Has anybody figured out why he did?
Not that I know of. But my point is, that guy, it should be within the abilities of the White House to put somebody on television to say, you know what, it's always a tragedy when somebody dies, and show something like real regret that this operation that we're trying to pull off, and JD Vance.
When you've been called the Gestapo nonstop,
no, I get that.
Feelings harden, and unfortunately, we're seeing the wages of this rhetoric. They should have the Buddhist kind of stillness of mind to realize that what's happening in each situation and respond appropriately. But as I say, people who have been called stormtroopers, Gestapo, Nazis, and so on, have been emotionally prepped for defensiveness, and that they have not figured out how to mentally rise above that is not to their credit. But I mean, look at the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago and what went on in the park in Chicago. A massive beat down of hippies by Daley's police that was, I don't think, by any measure called for. You know what I mean? Like, they just went through that place and rooted it up. And we don't yet. And the funny thing is, we don't yet have intellectuals and celebrity figures in the midst of this, like we did back then. They have yet to import to Minneapolis the Hollywood stars who are going to stand on the barricade. There's no Allen Ginsberg, and there's no Jean Genet, and there's no William Burroughs, and there's no all these other people who stood for the kind of world intellectual class. But in conflict, people use the language of conflict. And the federal government, has to have the presence of mind to realize that no matter what is thrown at it, it is a separate and higher institution that cannot play by those rules. That as much as it might like to, as much as it might reflexively feel, demonized, insulted, libeled, it has to act a certain way. And that's got to take discipline that they haven't really shown it yet.
No, they haven't. And it's troubling. And for all the people who are giving me a hard time about being like a bleeding heart who's apologizing for anti-ICE protesters, look, I recoil in the same way from the behavior of the people who went into the church, right, and just showed a total. It wasn't even so much that they went in. It was the total lack of empathy for the idea that somebody that these people deserved it because they were associated with somebody else. That this was, this is the kind of thing that you can do to somebody just because or even somebody's kids just because they're associated with somebody who works at ICE. And
dude, that's like if right-wing protesters went into food co-ops and said, "You eat granola, I know you're a communist. You know, I see you with that organic cereal." This kind of broadening by a cultural association of guilt is, wow, terrifying. And what I've read about the church thing since then is that it was not as passive and in ingress as we thought. Children were separated from parents. Children were scared. Certain routes of egress were blocked. People who,
and as people have pointed out, if you get separated, if you separate me from my children, that's going to be a problem. Like, yeah, I'm a peaceful person, but that will be a problem. And look, but it's the same thing. And I hate to go back to this because I know people like roll their eyes about this, but we were talking about Martin Luther King Jr. a couple of weeks, a week ago. Was it a week ago? And it was the understanding that all these things are political acts, in addition to, the operation and the purpose of it. Everything's on film now. Everything is political. Everything is rhetorical, and if you don't show, a level of humanity in what you're doing, then you're going to lose the argument, right? And you can even use, in a different situation, you can even use the overt hostility of the media, and of protesters against you, against them. If you exercised enough discipline, if you had enough foresight to know how to deal with all of this, but they haven't done it. And I know there are a lot of people who are frustrated because they feel like, I don't want to support this, but I can't support that either. Like it's a difficult time.
Well, power upon power falls responsibility. Those with power are responsible for a higher standard of behavior, a higher standard of restraint, especially if they have weaponry and if they represent our elected government. They are meant to act on behalf of the people, not themselves. At the same time, there's a lot of frustration with another side that can use all those rules against them. I have every right to provoke you. I have every right to get in your face. I have every right to humiliate you. I have every right to libel you, slander you, call you the worst names. I have every right to expose you personally, to follow you, to make you feel scared, to make you feel watched. Now, that is, to some, not fair fighting. Also, there's this. And we haven't addressed this because maybe, Matt, you find this hyperbole or just factually unsupportable. But there in other countries are things called color revolutions. And they always start with the noblest causes. And they always revolve around the most outrageous excesses on the parts of the government. And they always seem to have involved in them the martyrdom of someone or the excessive use of force. Oh, the security forces rained down hell on Maiden Square. But yet they all seem to go in a certain way, despite each having their own unique set of specific incidents and inciting and triggering moments. Their trend is to move out power and move in a new power. And are we experiencing anything like that, is my question to our audience. Not that it can be answered at this point, but is there a sense, because it too will color our interpretation of individual incidents to come. And there are incidents to come. We do know that. We don't know what they are, but we know they're on God's assembly line or the devil's, and they're coming our way. Are we experiencing a fight between powers that are closer to organized political powers than they are to spontaneous street actions?
Well, I don't think it's that hard to make the argument that something along those lines is actually taking place. Look, I lived in Eastern Europe at a time when all of those tactics were being tried out for the first time. There was the Otpor revolution in Serbia in 2000. There was the Orange Revolution. I don't know anybody who was there, but the Rose Revolution in Georgia, I did have some friends who were there for that. And one of the reasons why this particular moment in history makes me nervous is exactly that. I do recognize, or I do feel like there are political and media behaviors that feel familiar to me. There is the urging of people out in the streets. There is it's the constant refrains about illegitimacy and incipient loss of sovereignty. There's always a martyr, somebody who's been improperly arrested or beaten or something like that, who becomes a symbol, right? And then there's massing of protesters. It's sometimes it's just to clog the halls of government, right? That's one way that it's done. Then after that, there are calls for people to step down, right? We haven't reached that moment yet. But the other themes that you will see in, the old USAID supported media outlets in Eastern Europe are very much present in modern day American media. Donald Trump he might as well be, one of a dozen different ousted leaders who is basically caricatured as pure evil and an obstacle to international good citizenship and needs to be removed for the good of everybody. And yeah, that is a thing. And there's an element of that, especially now in Minnesota, where you have politicians actively kind of egging people on towards these actions, and I feel, especially the people who are going out there and without really a clue about how wound up these dudes are, and don't have a lot of experience in the world, and don't realize how fraught every second is in an encounter with law enforcement. You see what the results can be, like the spouse of Rebecca Good talking about how, oh my God, I can't believe they used real bullets. That person to me is a victim of somebody pushing them into a situation they didn't understand, right? In the same way that the police there, like the law enforcement there, is in a nearly impossible situation. But what the one thing they can't do is shoot and kill, right? That is going to be in a politically losing thing every time. So,
well, they have to be able to shoot and kill if they feel that they're in a life-threatening situation. Everyone has the right to shoot and kill if they feel like they're in a life-threatening situation, law enforcement included. Just because we might have judged these to be ambiguous or unfortunate or not rising to the standard of legal self-defense or whatever, doesn't mean that one won't come. My only point was that there's something about this that feels closer to that which you described going on abroad than other things that have happened in America have felt for a while. It feels like it has the flavor, the structure, some of the rhetoric, and some of the organization of an actual revolt. And from the taking of territory to the using of communications to the where's your papers, the Citizens Brigade police type actions, the checkpoints, and what might be or may not be a connection to actual elected officials or at least political figures in the comms and in the direction of the matter. We used to have things like the Weather Underground in the United States. Maybe we still do in some form, but back in the early 70s, there were how can I put it? Well-structured, hierarchical, command and control domestic terrorist organizations that carried out bombings and burglaries and assassinations with regularity, and did so in a fashion that was almost open. They also had manifestos, made declarations. Some of their leaders might be on the run, but they issued communiques. So it sort of became almost comic by the time it became the Symbionese Liberation Army,
Right.
kidnapping Patty Hearst and robbing banks. But before that, there were actual armies, as it were, and we don't know that style of fighting might not be coming, and there may be some sort of cyber form of it, that the tech assisted form of it that has a different flavor that is happening now. And I'll just repeat for the umpteenth time, the extent to which people are going to have broken hearts or immediately empathetic reactions to human tragedies will be somewhat modified by their sense that they're in an organized warfare situation. And if you think that, how can I put this? If you think that each casualty in a war is going to be a point at which you decide whether or not to keep fighting it, that's a little naive. to the extent that people perceive this as a war, they are going to harden their hearts to the individual tragedies along the way, one way or another. And Matt, I think you've been more accurate than me in predicting the growth of this thing, the extent to which it would just keep going. I maybe because I'm a Minnesota and I know how damn cold it is there. I just couldn't believe that the persistence would rise to the level it has. But now I'm starting not only to believe you, but I'm starting to trump you and thinking that, like, wow, as I dig into it and see some of the resources and the sophistication of the organization, I'm thinking maybe this is a real stand for a group that has been a bit amorphous and whose actions we've seen at different times in, Palestinian or other protests that looked more like protests, but is now deciding to mass its strength for a win. And that's how it's looking to me now.
Well, I think everybody, unfortunately, the social media incentives, the media incentives are all exist to worsen the situation. There is no incentive. There's no political incentive to try to find any place that isn't a more militant stance right now, which is odd because as I mentioned earlier in the show, the most recent polls aren't particularly friendly to either party. They show both of them at record lows of support, while the number of independents has gone up. The Democratic and Republican parties are at 27% right now. Independents are at 45%, right? Now the leaners are moving a little bit more in the direction of the Democrats than they have been, but this situation isn't helping either party all that much. It is creating this vast population of people that doesn't feel good about what's happening, and they don't have a voice out there anymore. And you mentioned the bombings in the 70s. We can show SOT 6 after this too, where Bill Ayers talks about the days of rage and everything. But I think that's when Middle America closed off its mind to the 60s protest, right? Like we talked about this with Fear and Loathing before too. Again, all these things are in addition to being real events, they're performances too, right? And some things play better than others. But I wanted to play this because this leads into the last thing I wanted to talk about, which is the deployment of the National Guard.
We will build a revolutionary youth movement capable of actively engaging in the war against the imperialists. We will escalate our attacks until imperialism is defeated in Vietnam. This fall, in Chicago, at the time the conspiracy trials begin, we will lead massive demonstrations against the war, in support of the Black Panther Party, and in solidarity with all political prisoners, including Huey P. Newton and the 8 under attack for last summer's righteous demonstrations.
So Tim Walz activated the National Guard. I think it was yesterday. And the quote was about that they wanted to support their deputies at the Whipple Federal Building so that we can reallocate deputies to other areas in need in support of the county. But this creates really almost an unprecedented situation where you might have local official officers stacked up against federal forces. So I think people need to go back. This is going to be a situation where we're all going to have to go back and learn the history of when these kinds of deployments happen. and how that's resolved itself. Walter, can you talk for a second while I work this out?
Yeah. Just go for it, dude. Yeah. Well, America does have a series of rebellions and uprisings, a lot of which happened in the 19th century and some in the 18th, with which we can, contextualize this. Some are more relevant than others, I think. Tax protests are one thing because, like I say, I don't know quite how to align this with past, Whiskey Rebellion or Shays Rebellion or veterans, marching on Washington for unpaid benefits, as happened when MacArthur, put that down. But it's unclear what the demand here is, how ICE out of Minneapolis aligns with those tax protests or those demands for federal, monies that weren't paid, or those hands-off, hands-off.
Well, that's one of the things that makes this whole thing strange. If you go back and look, the deployment of federal troops to put down some kind of local rebellion has happened for forces that would be considered reactionary. It is taken place because of uprisings that would be considered leftist, right?
Yes.
And there's a whole canvas of reasons why this has happened before in the past. This is, I think, the oddest one, right?
It is odd. I'm trying to find one that it mates with. It doesn't mate with the schools of the South refusing black students. It doesn't quite have to do with, the various tax rebellions. The veterans demanding their payment for World War I, going to Washington. It's not that really. Also, I'm trying to understand the class element here, because even in the Vietnam War and the civil disorder around it had a very distinctive class element. Okay. You had college students protesting sort of on behalf of working class people who were actually fighting the goddamn war, who really didn't like them much. It wasn't thank you for doing that. It was like, hey, fuck you, you spoiled brats, having your parties and your be-ins and your Jefferson Airplane concerts on the behalf of little me sitting in a foxhole, in the highlands of Vietnam. But there is there is a little bit though of a class element even in this thing, I will, as I discern it, maybe I'm wrong. And it's this: the supposed constituents of this movement are what? Illegal immigrants. We're not seeing them on the front lines, apparently, because they have to be hiding from getting arrested, right? So they're being protested for or on behalf by people who, by white people who of good heart, of liberal beliefs and activist instincts. And against them are ICE, who I would perceive, even though their faces are covered, as a lot of veterans and the equivalent of law enforcement, placing them maybe in what you might call the working or middle class category. When I see a young guy standing in front of a busted up hotel, saying, hey, can you move back? Even looking a little scared. He looks to me like a Vietnam soldier in some ways. A little young, a little uncertain, a little anxious, who took the job that would give him a leg up in his society, where it's hard enough to get one, which was a job with the U.S. government fighting, or maybe he was drafted in Vietnam briefly. He might have been a draftee. And that also gives me a little bit of pause. ICE does not look, ICE versus college professor looks a little to me like Soldier Boy versus guy who goes to Whole Foods. Sorry. And
Well, look, yeah, the class angle on this entire dispute has been underreported. It's been underreported since Trump ran for president, frankly.
Yes.
It's almost absent from coverage. And that is another incredibly frustrating aspect to this whole thing. You know, we read about before the shooting this weekend. Apparently, somebody who was being chased by ICE ran into the donut shop where they reflexively locked the doors and people gathered in front. Do we know? Did anybody know who this person was? Why he was being chased? Like why they were protecting him? Beyond the fact that he was being chased by ICE, it's a very strange thing, right? And as you say, the relationship between, sort of mostly, I think it's probably inaccurate to call this a fully upper class crowd because there is an awful lot of organic organization going on online to Donald Trump, but there isn't a whole lot of organic tie between the protesters and the people who are being looked for by ICE. A couple of things I just wanted to get in before we move on. I was very interested in reading yesterday about the Posse Comitatus Act. Most people remember that the Posse Comitatus Act was a big catchword during the Bush years because nobody wanted to see people in uniform on streets after 9/11. Remember that whole thing?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when we go back in history and find out where it came from southern states during the Reconstruction protesting the arrival of federal authorities to police Reconstruction and to implement it. There were episodes like there was an election in Louisiana, and I believe in 1874, maybe 1872, where it's disputed who actually won the election, but Ulysses S. Grant essentially sent troops to make sure that the Republican got in office. And as a result of this, after years of this, and after years of cartoons that portrayed Rutherford B. Hayes, of all people, as a monarch who was going to impose sort of martial law on the South, that's how we got the Posse Comitatus Act. Mainly because of a reaction to federal intervention after the Civil War, which is interesting, right? Like I would have thought it came from some other place. But as you mentioned, there are so many different situations where this has happened before. Sometimes it's on the left, right? Like when you had the railroad strikes, the Pullman strike in the 1890s, and federal troops were essentially set down to be strike breakers. And in other cases, you had federal troops who were on the side of the Angels, maybe, not even maybe, they were on the side of the Angels in desegregation. But we've never had a situation, I can't see since the Civil War that is this fraught with potential problems, because you're going to have two armed groups that are going to be in potential conflict, and I don't know how that ends well.
I'm gonna add something more, because I often take the dramatist's view of things, and there are a lot of elements to drama that cause us to have one reaction or another, and one is costume. Costume is very important in our response to dramatic spectacle. The fact that the ICE agents must it seems, for purposes of safety and so on, be masked, wear these uniforms that are, absolutely paramilitary, obscure their individuality, is not a plus for them. That they must go around as RoboCop while everybody else gets gets the individual costume and their special hat, their individuality as far as dress is a distortion of the situation. Behind those ICE masks are people, are individuals with haircuts and facial expressions and eyes and different colors of skin, which is also obscured, white, black, brown, etc., female, male. But the costuming does not allow them or afford them the empathy that we grant individuals. And, to write a horrible kind of dystopian movie in a way, or, I would, maybe Starship Troopers, I would have a big screen go up over the street in which ICE people without their costumes go, I am ICE,
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
I'm Jim.
Yeah.
I love the ball. I'm ICE. And then, I'm Jenny. I'm the, dancer size queen of Toledo, Ohio. And I've won 4 trophies.
In my spare time, I go and I looked for sex offenders, right?
Right. Yeah. And I'm ICE because it is an advantage for one side when the other side is forced to dress as villains and all the same villain. I'm not giving any recommendations to the Department of Homeland Security for its next public relations campaign, but I think we have to understand that calling people stormtroopers when they look like fucking stormtroopers is a lot easier. And
Right?
when they can't take off the damn helmet.
That's what I mean. I mean, like I think they lost something. It's been a big negative for like the Antifa style protester that they go around in masks. It conveys something to the disinterested person that is not positive when it's I just have a story I got to tell about this.
Yeah.
So I was an extra in the movie The Saint, which is one of the
that means you met Val Kilmer, my friend.
I did not meet Val Kilmer. I wish I had. He was a hero of mine. I'm in the Red Square protest scene, and I was on the front line where it was protesters versus cops. They used real cops, and they didn't not only use real cops. They used a special unit called the OMON, which in Russia they wear masks. Nobody knows who they are. They are unidentified. A super elite unit that basically goes in and kicks ass in places. They are feared, and their anonymity has long been understood to be part of the menace. They are descended from an ancient race, an ancient group that dates back to like the days of Ivan the Terrible. They were called the Oprichniki, who wore masks. Nobody knew who they were. And when the Tsar really wanted to kick somebody's ass, he would send about 20 or 30 of these dudes into someplace, get all the nobles in a row, have them on their knees and burn their beards off and then take off again, right? So the concept of masked cops, it carries a connotation of menace, I think, for almost everybody in the world. And I'm not sure that that's been a good thing for ICE, right? Like, I think a lot of those
it makes it a lot easier to spin on somebody if they don't have a face. It makes it a lot easier to say, hey, big boy, go have some lunch. Whoever, Renee Good's wife, if big boy doesn't have a face. at the same time, when you are faceless, it tends to cause you to feel like you're part of a group, a unit, that you are, in other words, I will shoot to defend my buddy because my buddy is me. We're both the same. We both look the same. When I look at him and he looks at me, we see the same thing. What Walter's point here is something out of some long-haired textbook about the humanities and probably completely irrelevant to most people. But I would say that the style with which you comport yourself in conflict is in some ways predictive of what kind of conflict it will be, and what its emotional strategies and tendencies will be. Maybe there's something there to think about for the future. I don't know, but if we could remember that there are faces behind all of these individuals, couldn't hurt. I mean,
Right. Okay. So at John EJ5JK, the dehumanizing effect of masks is the reason the protesters forced them into wearing them after doxing and threatening their families. Okay, I get it. I get what the official reason is, but it's a trade-off. But politics is a trade-off. Do you want a million images of masked police on television? And people,
or do you want your family to be killed at home by revolutionaries who saw your face and used facial recognition scanning, which they have too? That's a hell of a trade-off, Matt.
It is, but has it happened yet? I mean, in other words, there might be threats. I get threatened, right? Like, just for doing my stupid job. I know it's unpleasant for these guys. And as I said, being put in the position that they're in, it's automatically political, way above and beyond what their jobs are originally meant to include. But putting them in masks, I think, has been a disservice to them. That's just my opinion. I think it's dehumanized them.
A lot of these people fear cartels too, and we're not being honest.
That might be true.
We're not being honest about the fact that it's not the immigration problem has an organized crime element to it that we're not being candid about, honestly. The truth is, in Minnesota, a group of fraudsters, extraordinaire, a mafia extraordinaire, which steals billions, is being disrupted and is sitting back there quite conveniently shielded while all this crap goes on, because 3 weeks ago they were in the damn crosshairs. And those people, though their particular racket may be welfare fraud, are also they have equivalents in other states, organized groups whose jobs and whose rackets aren't quite so clean, and they involve human trafficking, and they involve mass importing of drugs, and so on. And these ICE people are, in some sense, not that far in many respects, and in certain states, from the federales trying to hold down the cartels in Mexico. This is the dimensions of our immigration problem extend far beyond the way it distorts the labor market or the housing market. Anybody who's a real student of America knows that cradled within this phenomena is a massive organized crime problem. Some of it organized crime of the softer white collar shipping out money variety, and some of it of the street control wire clockers kind, except it goes all the way back across the border. And that's another way in, and the urgency about cleaning that up is, for the Trump administration, a big part of their motivation. See, in their self-image, they're saving America from gangs, from massive criminal enterprises, not taco trucks.
I get that. They just haven't done it. They haven't done the best job of communicating that, and they haven't been great in situations like this. But look, these are all optics questions. The larger issue is just something I think we got to stand back and just note as a matter of historical importance, that this has become an extremely serious moment in American history, and I don't see it getting less intense anytime soon. Quickly, Walter, I know we don't have time today to get into it, but our next book is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and for those who haven't read this book, it is very much in the theme of a lot of the books that we've read, like 1984, even A Scanner Darkly. I'm trying to think of some others that we've done. But
That Hideous Strength.
Yeah, right, exactly. That Hideous Strength.
And it's closer in a way to That Hideous Strength in that it involves technocrats, and it's also closer to modern American society in that it's geared towards things like hedonism and individual behavior in a way that the others are these sort of ruthless top-down bureaucracies that strangle the human spirit. Here, the people are complicit in their own destruction in a way that we don't really we didn't see a lot in the other books. Do you have any quick introductory thoughts about Brave New World before we sign off for today? Yes. For those who are embarking on Brave New World, either for the first time or for the first time seriously since being forced to read it, because it can be a kind of sleepy book at first. What I would urge you to do is look at the biography of the author. First of all, it's a book that was written back in the 1920s, okay? But Aldous Huxley was the kind of figure, what you might call a public intellectual, a scientist, from a family of eminent scientists, and from a sort of scholarly or social network in England that we don't have the equivalent of in America. I don't think they have the equivalent of in England anymore, actually, of thinkers, seers, social figures, and kind of managing directors of culture that was a unique property of England of that time. And he was looking out at his future, not as George Orwell, who was kind of an engaged journalist, but almost as an aristocrat, telling us, a little like H.G. Wells maybe, telling us what he expected civilization to turn into. And a refresher on his biography, I think, would really help understand the book, because he's writing it in a different way than a regular writer would. He's writing it as a kind of appointed philosopher king for a society that had very stratified, hierarchical sense of who could speak for the whole society, and he was one. He went on to have an interesting career as a advocate of hallucinatory drugs, all sorts of other futuristic ways of being. He kind of became a free love advocate later on, and so on. But at the time he's writing, in the late 1920s, with the technology that existed, and in the wake of World War I, without World War II being quite as present as it was to some of these, or even as looming as possible as it was for some of these other authors, he gives us an almost scientific read on what he thinks the dominant forces in society are and how they will win. And in it is a vision of what man really is. And he basically decides that man is a pleasure-seeking animal ultimately, and a pain-avoiding animal, and that between those two properties, his future will be determined.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thesis. It's one that will strike a lot of chords with people in this heavily medicated and heavily prescribed society that we live in, and it's also interesting because it's such an early effort at the dystopian vision, right?
And I guess it's free, and it's free of the certain kind. It's free of politics of the kind we've come to know.
Right. Yes, exactly. Orwell manifestly, a socialist leaning author who had doubts later. But yeah, it's not political in that way. It's more of a description of a society. And you're right that it does start off a little slow, although I've encountered this with some other stories of his, that you have to just give him time a little bit, and he will get you will find a mental rhythm with his prose. It's just, it doesn't just like snap, crackle, and pop off the page like some other authors that we've done. But it takes a moment. But anyway, we'll get into it more in our next show. Walter, thanks for the spirited conversation, and thanks everybody.
Thank you back.
And we'll see you later this week.
See you then, man.